Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you back to this channel. I am Professor Oriaso Odongo, and my channel is Professor Oriaso Odongo Knowledge Hub. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to today talk to you about the biophysical methods of climate change research. I remember I had previously talked about the socioeconomic methodology, and I did say a number of things. Today, allow me to bring you this presentation, and I want to begin to talk to you about what biophysical methods are in climate change. And I also want to tell you about the nature of the biophysical environment. I'll not forget to tell you about the aspects of climate change that are being studied through biophysical methods. I will also tell you about why biophysical methods are needed in climate change research. And then I go specifically to some of the biophysical methods that are often used in climate change research, like experiment, remote sensing, GIS. Then we have the biophysical surveys, we have the expert opinion and all that. And then I will be able to take you through some of the selected tools that are used in biophysical research. I want to start this by telling us about the fact that biophysical methods is one of the methods that is very important in climate change research. I had previously said that climate change is both biophysical and socioeconomic, and I did talk about the socioeconomic aspect of it. And I want to say that biophysical environment has got to do with the interactions that we have in the natural world. Look at, for example, we have soils, we have plants, we have animals, and we have them making the Earth's ecosystems, as it were. And people also live there, plants are also there, and everything else survives in such ecosystem. So particularly we would be having those biophysical environments like the marine environment. We also have the atmospheric environment. We also have the terrestrial environment. So terrestrial is land, marine could be water, and then we have atmospheric comprising of air. And so if you break that down, we're talking about these terminologies like lithosphere, that is land, hydrosphere is water, and then we have atmosphere is air and all that. And so we talk about interaction of a number of processes. We call them the biophysical processes. We ask ourselves what sort of biophysical processes are there, particularly with regard to climate change. And we begin to talk about like changing vegetation, we have there rising or lowering of water, issues like salinity, alkalinity, the formation of snow, glaciation, look at the glaciers and all those things that we have had, including even ice formation and all that. We look at the temperature, we look at precipitation, wind, pressure, and a number of things. Imagine we talked about even volcanic activities, eruptions, erosion activity, earthquakes and earth tremors, and quite a lot. And we previously also talked about some of the impacts or evidences of climate change, and we remember having mentioned a few of them. And allow me to just mention others that we call biophysical evidences. Maybe look at the glacier. I talked about the glaciers, the snows and all that. Talked about in rainfall, reduction or increase of rainfall. We talked about that, the changing seasons. I remember we have mentioned them. We're talking about the changing vegetation cover, talk about drought, talk about floods, talking about changing even in timing, like timing of leafing in plants, timing on fruiting, timing in even maturity of our plants and even our crops. Look at changes in growth and development of animals, look at migration, look at even shifting of species that we had talked about. It's much more concerned with how we apply the physical principles and methods in biological problems. Remember, we had talked about the natural processes, the natural science previously. We have a number of methods that people use to study this, and you've previously been close to that. Some people even use satellites to study the earth and everything else that is contained there. Even capture information. Some are captured in radar and that. Even climatologists, you know them, they use a lot of methodology to quantify, or they use to understand the biophysical and physical phenomena. And look at even paleoclimate scientists, the way they use various records and to read and then understand and even validate data, and even computerize such data that we are using for various reasons, including reasons of simulations, reasons of predictions, and all that. So those are some of the things that we are talking about. So having said that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to talk to you about the effects of climate change on biophysical environment. And I think I want to start by saying that climate change has immense effect on biophysical environment, just like it does socioeconomic environment we discussed previously. Now, with regard to this, climate change leads to very high temperatures, and high temperatures are the ones that we have always associated with global warming and the depletion of ozone layer. I think we have been able to mention that. And we also have climate change affecting rainfall and precipitation. Sometimes it leads to intensity, sometimes it leads to its reduction. I think we have been able to mention that. It also leads to the kind of extreme temperatures we have had, leading to even drought. We have so many places in the world which experience a lot of drought, while some also experience flooding. So what happens? Flooding occurs when there is very high amount of rain and all that. We also associate it with the vegetation depletion and reduction and even loss of the vegetation. We associate it with that. We also have a reduction in animals and even plant species that we talked about. Look at the species loss. Then we also associate it with reduction in water, energy, transportation, wildlife, agricultural production, ecosystems, and even problems with human health and even diseases we talked about. So those are actually issues within the biophysical environment. It also leads to shrinkage of water sources, oceans, rivers, lakes, as it were. Sometimes even strong winds that we have had, the tornadoes. We also have volcanic eruptions, environmental degradations that we are having, and a couple of so many things that we associate climate change with, especially on the biophysical environment we had talked about. And allow me also to mention what biophysical methods normally study. So when we use these methods, what do we study? Remember what we had discussed about aspects of climate change studied using socioeconomic. So here we are looking at aspects of climate change that we study through the biophysical ones. We study water, for example. We study energy. We study ecosystems and even services within the ecosystem. And then we study air quality and even quantity. We study soil and soil structure. We study solar physics, a number of things that we study. We study glaciology and the formation of glacier and all those processes. We study human, we study animal, and we study plant health, for example. We study land and land use systems through this method. We also study wildfires, the origins of wildfires and how we deal with them. We also study wind, humidity. We also study pressure that we're having. We study soil and geological properties using these methodologies. And we also study even forests and vegetations, their distribution and a number of things. We study landslides and even their potentials. We also study the slope stability of our environment. We study streams and stream profiles using this methodology. We even study land and even planning, physical planning, and then we study the demographic and population distributions. Quite a number of things that we are able to study. So you can imagine, so how would we study water and how climate change affects it if we were not to deploy the biophysical methodology? How are we able to study solar physics, for example? So look at those. So then we have a number of methods that we use to study biophysical environments. And these are quite many, and they are dependent upon a number of factors also. And most of the biophysical methods, as it were, are normally informed by the natural science that we have previously discussed. And to a large extent, we are also making reference to positivism. You remember those methodologies we talked about. Now, the main methods that I want to highlight in this presentation will be experimental methods, the empirical methods that we use. We also use remote sensing, we use GIS, we use predictive and simulative models that we are using also. And then sometimes we also use what we call the expert methods. I want to just run you through these methods. Like experimental methods, we know experimental methods, and I remember I even associated socioeconomic methods with the quasi-experimental. So if it is experimental methods, we strictly use the scientific method, and to a large extent, even the coming of experimental method is known. It was meant to test and confirm hypotheses. And it helps us to understand a number of things. So it helps us to understand the complex interactions that exist between climate change variables and the ecosystems. And then it gives us good insight and even inform some of the strategies that we even use in mitigation and adaptation, the way we have been able to say. But when you're using this methodology, then there are three critical principles that guide it, like replication. You ensure that the results which you are able to get are very reliable. It also includes the principle of randomization that we had mentioned with the socioeconomic, and where normally randomize all the entities that are there, like experimental groups. Then we also talk about control as a major principle. You control so that you provide baseline against which you are supposed to compare the treatment effects. So those are the things we are talking about. We have various levels of experiments that we can use. We have manipulative experiments, we have observational experiments, we have simulation experiments. If you're using manipulative experiments, then it means that you manipulate variables like, say, precipitation or temperature, and so that you can study their impact on the ecosystem. And then if you use the observational studies, then you observe the natural phenomenon with regard to climate variables and even their impact on the ecosystem. And then you can also use the simulative one, where you use models to simulate the impacts of climate change, a more or less specialized method of getting a simulated picture of the reality we are talking about. Then when you're using experimental methods, that is why you factors that you determine could be like scale. You would use it with maybe from a small plot to even an entire ecosystem, as it were. So you can experiment with that. So it also depends on the duration. You want to study short term, medium term, or long term. And what about the complexity of the matter that you are dealing with? Is it a simple matter, complex matter, so that you be able to design your experiments appropriately? The other one I want to mention quickly is the use of remote sensing and the use of GIS, geographical information systems. Now, remote sensing is not really new to most of you who are scientists, because it simply involves the collecting of data about the Earth's surface. And how do you do this? There are many ways by which you can collect information about Earth's surface or anything that is in the Earth's surface, particularly by way of using even aircraft or by way of using even satellites, so that you are able to see what's going on. And GIS, as it were, involves analyzing and interpreting the data that you have been able to collect using some specialized computer softwares that are going to give you impressions of the state of affairs. So sometimes they work together. You would be able to use that specialized tool that gives you an interpretation, analysis, and then an interpretation of what you have been able to visualize. What is its impression? How does it look? So that you are able to use it to design or to explain or to represent the state of affairs. The two methods, the RS and GIS, are very sure methods, particularly for collecting and converting information around land, around the marine, around the atmosphere, and you take that information to really provide you with data around climate change behavior. And you can use them for other reasons, like in regional and urban planning, for example. You want to design the vegetation cover. You want to look at temperature and precipitation of a place. You're still able to use such impressions to give you a picture. And you can apply remote sensing in a number of ways. So where do you normally apply it? particularly if you want to study, for example, land cover classification. So look at land cover classification, for example. You want to classify land into various categories of forest, look at grassland, shrubland. You'll be able to use that remote sensing to give you that classification. You also use it to measure the parameters of climate change, like you measure temperature, you measure precipitation, and even the extent of sea icing. You can use that method. And sometimes you also use it in ecosystem monitoring. So you can use it in a number of ways. You monitor ecosystem productivity, even the element within the ecosystems. You can study lake, river, ocean, even their distribution, even the distribution of aquatic life within them. You can also use it to study even human and wildlife population and even distribution. Also use it to study the distribution of land use, or even the land use planning, as it was. So you can deploy RS in a number of ways. Let me also talk to you about how you can deploy GIS, for example. You can use it to detect land cover change. If you want to prove that land cover has changed over time, you can use that computer-aided technology to get you to see the extent of the change that we're talking about. Or you can use it for climate variable mapping. You can map temperature, and you can map precipitation, particularly using special patterns that we are having. You can even generate trends that you are able to use to tell you to project. And lastly, we can also use GIS to assess ecosystem vulnerability. And I think this is frequently being used. So we assess how vulnerable an ecosystem is to the climate change variability, like temperature, precipitation, and even pressure. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to also talk to you quickly about the limitation of these tools. What do you think is the problem with the remote sensing and GIS? I have three issues that I want to raise quickly. The first one is on data quality. The second one is on data integration, and then the last one is on data analysis. You know, these are specialized tools and methods of biophysical research. And mostly, if you look at the first one, like in data quality, this depends on sensor calibration, for example. And sometimes you'll be using a sensor that is not fit for this particular thing. And so you don't get a very high quality of data. Sometimes the problem lies with the atmospheric conditions of the place. It's possible that remote sensing may not really be effective when we have foggy situations, as it were. And then the other issue we are talking about with regard to GIS could be on those processing algorithms. We've heard about algorithms before. You have certain things that affects the precision with which you capture that kind of data. It might be problematic. The other issue is with the data integration. It is very difficult for many researchers to integrate data from RS and GIS, particularly with other methods. And if you look at that, you really, because the main issue revolves around the different scales and the different resolutions that these tools will bring. Then the last one is on analysis of data. Data analysis from GIS and RS require high level skills and even very expensive softwares, and the software keeps on being updated. And if this is the case, then you can imagine it poses real problem with that kind of with its use. I want to quickly go to the third method of modeling and simulation. I think we have talked about this. We've had situations where we are able to predict climate change, even in the next over 50 years or 100 years. How are we able to do this? We use these tools. We do modeling and simulations. These are not new. So these tools are used to understand and predict climate change impacts. We are able to use them for that. And models, as it were, particularly with regard to climate change parameters, they can simulate behavior of complex systems. And then they give us insights into potential consequences of the different climate change scenarios. We are able to tell you that in the next 50 years, this is how the situation is going to be. In the next 100 years, this is how the situations will be. How do we do that? We use modeling and simulation methods. And these models are normally developed in a very specialized way. They are developed and validated using robust methods. use observational data to construct them, so that we ensure that they are as precise as possible. They assure reliability and accuracy of data. And to a large extent, these models can be mathematically stated. So we can have equations or formulas that we use to be able to describe the behavior of an ecosystem, particularly with regard to climate change issues we are having. And so we have types of models that we use to simulate climate impacts. Like we have the global climate models, we have the regional climate models, and then we have ecosystem models. So if they are global, then it means that they simulate behavior of a global climate ecosystem and give us information around impact of climate change at global level. But if they are regional, they also do the regional extent. They give us the behavior of climate system at a regional expanse. I think that is important. And sometimes they are at very localized levels. We have what the ecosystem models, which give us behavior within an ecosystem, say on health and productivity. And so let's talk about the various application of these models. We normally use them for three main reasons. One, we can use them to predict future climate scenarios or situations. So we are talking about if this does not happen over the next 40 years, then this is what we are going to get. If this happens over the next 50 years, this is what we are likely to see. So we just use such kind of simulations. Secondly, we also use them to evaluate the effectiveness of mitigation and adaptation strategies that we use. So on basis of simulations, we are able to effectively judge whether our approaches, whether our strategies that we are using with regard to mitigation and adaptations are very effective. They are also very instrumental in informing or influencing policy. Most of us use it to do planning. Look at even the kind of responses that we are having. Even the kind of policies, the kind of legislations that we are having, they are based on hard facts, on data that we have been able to get through scientific simulation and modeling of climate change consequences that we've been able to have. Now, fourthly, let me talk about the empirical methods. You know about the empirical methods. On using biophysical methods, the empirical methods are strictly natural science applications, and we use them to do qualitative and quantitative analysis. We can do small scale, large scale, we can do medium scale studies that we are having. And we have been able to use them to study water and even the properties. We use them to study soil and even the properties, even these gases and even the substances. We've been able to use them to assess and analyze a lot of other issues within climate change. But I have been able to mention that it's a very scientific method of quantification and qualification that we use. And we just mentioned that they're largely being used by experts and other scholars to do a lot of this. So they borrow a great deal from natural science and positivism, and they rely greatly on observation, quantification, replication, and naturalism. They kind of are the normal processes that we even undertake in laboratories, those that we undertake even in the field to study the various properties of the ecosystem components we have been talking about. And then lastly, let me talk about the biophysical surveys. We also know about the surveys. We rely on the biophysical data to be able to run a number of surveys, and they kind of give us realistic information that we are talking about. We can use them to study climate, water system, water sources, use them even to study land use, land capacity, look at even biological data that we are talking about, even use them for soil erosion. And there are a number of other methods that I'm not able to talk about today, but you can really just find them and see how we can deploy them to study the biophysical features of climate change. Lastly, let me just talk quickly about some of the useful tools. So you will quickly be able to see some of these tools we are having. Like we use tools like hydrometeorological models. We see how they are being used. We also use drought monitoring and forecasting models. They are most frequently being used to study drought and even forecast on what is likely to happen given which kind of situation. We also use them to study flood. We call those ones flood modeling and forecasting models. They are there and they have already been used and deployed to this. We also have scenario-based planning models that are there for you to use to be able to study a number of things, even to come up with scenarios like the ones that we use. We have even a time series analysis, trend analysis. We use even tools like the Mannkando tests and so many things. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to end it here. For now, please don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel. And remember, it is always Professor Oriaso Odongo Knowledge Hub. See you next time. Bye.